Now, I really didn't want to make this video at first, but it kind of depresses me how often I hear people talk about evolution with such vigor and certainty, even though they have no idea what they're talking about. And it's not necessarily their fault. Evolutionary biology is very complicated. And I am by no means an expert, but there are a lot of very simple concepts that people either don't understand or refuse to accept. And not many people have really attempted to explain all this without using a bunch of sciencey mumbo jumbo. And really, all you usually hear is people screaming, "It's a fact, it's only a theory," back and forth. But unlike metaphysical discussions about things like God and existence, we can actually back up our arguments on this one. And like I said, I'm not an expert, I'm not a scientist, but I've read a few things, and I'm going to share it with you in this video in a way that we can all understand. Alright, so is evolution a fact or a theory? The problem with that question is those three words, evolution, fact, and theory, all mean different things to different people. But since this is a science thing, how about we use the science definitions of those words? Is that fair? Evolution is basically when a population of organisms change over time and pass those changes on to the next generation. For example, when the house sparrow was introduced in North America, we noticed that over time the ones in the northern United States were darker and larger than the ones in the south, presumably because they adapted to the colder weather. A scientific fact is A, so heavily supported by evidence that it would be silly to think the contrary, and B, falsifiable, which means that if it were false, it would be easy to prove that it's false. An example of a scientific fact is that under normal circumstances on planet Earth, if I drop something, it goes downward. And I can prove this with a simple experiment. And that fact is falsifiable because if I drop something and it doesn't go down, that would clearly prove it to be false or at least flawed. Still work. Incidentally, that's also why things like intelligent design isn't science, because A, there's no evidence for it except for arguments like it looks like there's a designer, so there is a designer, and that in and of itself is a logical fallacy called an argument from incredulity. And B, it's not falsifiable because you could never prove it wrong, and those are like the two main characteristics you want a fact to have. Now, scientific theory is an explanation of those facts. For example, the theory for why things go downward when you drop them is because there's an invisible force that we call gravity. Theories and facts are two completely different things. It's confusing to people because we use the word theory in common language to basically mean an educated guess. Like if you say something like, "My theory is that the people on the island were dead all along." But that's not how scientists use the word at all. A scientific theory is not some guess that is waiting on more evidence so it can be graduated into a full fact. Scientists have a name for that, actually. It's called a hypothesis. Theories, on the other hand, are explanations of things we already know to be fact. That's why it's kind of annoying that so many people use the phrase, "evolution is only a theory." That doesn't mean anything. That's just like saying gravity is only a theory, so that doesn't change the fact that things fall when you drop them. Still works. Specific events can't be theories. Like if you say it's only a theory that man evolved from apes, that doesn't make sense. Theories are explanations of events. Events are either facts supported by evidence or not facts. But the second and main problem with the phrase evolution is only a theory is that it's not true. Evolution is a theory, but it's also a fact. Now that sounds weird if you don't understand what a theory is, which I guess a lot of people don't, but try to remember that theory means explanation and not guess. Now most people acknowledge that organisms change over time, like the sparrow example I gave earlier. This is called microevolution. What people have more trouble with is macroevolution, which results in a new species being formed in a process called speciation. The term fits, doesn't it? Now, this process can take millions of years, so it's easy to assume that we have little evidence of it, but actually scientists have and can observe speciation in both plants and animals. So there's that. That's the thing that happens. And even if it does take millions of years, we don't have to have been there. We have fossils that clearly indicate transitions from one species to the next. Like one of the most popular arguments against evolution is that there are no transitional fossils, but that's just not true at all. And there's lots of other evidence of macroevolution, but I just want to emphasize that evolution is a thing that happens and we can prove that it happens. Now, scientists have a multifaceted explanation for why this happened, and a big part of it is natural selection, which is a theory, explanation, theory. You get it now? Natural selection is a process where certain traits become more prominent over time because those traits are more conducive to survivability as a species. Another thing that people have a problem with is the idea that all life spawned from one single organic cell, which itself was formed from something inorganic. Now, this can get really complicated, but it basically goes like this. It's definitely a fact that all organisms, everything from humans to bacteria, have many, many, many things in common. They all reproduce in some way. They all pass on traits when they do so. They all have metabolisms. They all use the same types of chemicals and amino acids to perform those functions. They all have DNA, and the genetic code functions in the same way in all of them. And because of this and mountains of other evidence, scientists propose the theory, remember that word? The theory of common descent, which states that the reason that all life has so much in common is because all life spawned from a common ancestor. And as I said, there's tons of evidence for this, which you can read about, and zero evidence against it. Zero. As for organic life spawning from inorganic life, that is a scientific hypothesis. Remember that term? As it turns out, there's a lot of evidence for this as well, but not quite enough for it to be labeled a fact just yet. So let's recap. Organic life forming from inorganic life? Hypothesis. All life sharing a common ancestor? Theory. All life sharing a buttload of common characteristics? Fact. Microevolution? Fact. Macroevolution? Fact. Natural selection? Theory. Now, evolution has never been disproved and there's no evidence against it, but there's always these arguments that people will have because they're not really sure, they don't understand everything. So I put a link to this very long list of short and sweet responses to almost every argument that has ever been posed against evolution, and you can read that. Or if you want, you can just leave something in the comments and I will try my best to answer it. So if you get into a debate about evolution, you can share this video for a quick reference. If you think I've gotten anything wrong, then feel free to check my sources, which I will link in the description, and then leave me a comment. And if you don't trust my sources, then I guess just give me better sources or just believe what you want to believe.